During this presentation, we are going to analyze the reading on clientelism and voting behavior, evidence from a field experiment in Benin, with the help of some more contents written by Leonard Wanchekon, a political science expert in the field of African territory and its political system. Before setting the main researches done across different texts, it's important to set up the country political, historical, and economic background, in which case we are talking about Benin. Historically, Benin has been a French colony until 1960, when they got the independence and spent a post-independence characterized by political instability and alternating civil and military rule, and establishing a dictatorial regime led by Mathieu Kérékou. In 1990, there was produced a mass protest and economic pressure, which led to a multi-party democracy, and considering Benin as one of the most successful democracies in Africa. Nevertheless, it presents a high clientelism, which until some way can be explained because of the different ethnics across the country, which we will focus on this later. Then it is important to focus on the political background, where we first have to define clientelism as the distribution of personal favors to selected members of the electorate in exchange for ongoing political support. This means that voters have preference for private transfers than to public goods, also considered as national interests, as opposed to interest group politics that have an organized competition among groups that could lead to the representation of a variety of interests by one political party. Clientelism is characterized by the representation of a narrow corporatist and local interest. So which are the impacts of clientelism in voting behavior? 1. Budgetary procedures in many countries either lack transparency or are discretionary. Clientelism tends to favor those already in control of the government and therefore consolidates incumbency advantages. 2. Studies of electoral clientelism reveal the existence of gender or generation gaps, incumbency effects, and other results that could have important policy implications. These are the main points that will be touched across the presentation: the behavior of voters to clientelism, in which we have to take into consideration also how this type of government doesn't lead to a development of the economy. In this case, it would be necessary to stand out the randomista's point of view, considering that the economy depends on politics and so then of political institutions, which led from the historical and geographical background. Once talk about the background, we are able to get into more detail of the two questions that, thanks to the different texts, we will be able to answer. The first one refers basically to the text and its study, and it is: why is clientelism the most dominated electoral politics in Benin and considered the most popular model in poor countries? This question will be answered later on, but it's really important to stress out how it is based on a study done over the presidential elections that took place in March 2001, taking both villages that strongly support clientelism and also those ones who supported public policy. Anyways, the procedure will be explained afterwards. The second question, although doesn't been explained during the text of Mr. Wanchekon, it is exposed along the video of political economy and the text of the book Poor Economics by Duflo and Banerjee, and besides has a lot in common with the text of clientelism. And the question is, why Benin, considered as a poor country, continues having a low development on its economy? And how can this be changed? According to both questions exposed before, we will separate this part in two. One for each question to carry them out separate, although they're close relation. Referring to the success of clientelism and consequently its importance in poor countries. Taking the experiment for elections in Benin in 2001, the experiment design would circle around the idea that clientelism is based on ethnic voting and other political factors as incumbency or gender. So the experiment will be based in taking different villages and applying the standard model of redistributive politics, which means taking two political parties and the voters. This is due to ideological affinities are linked by ethnic affinities, so they will differentiate the campaign based on clientelism and the one based on public goods. Although both campaigns will transmit the same ideas, they will differ in the stressing issue, where one campaign will stress on a national program, also named as Projet de Société, while the other campaign will stress on the issue as a specific project to transfer government resources to the region or village. Having the experiment, the data collects that negative public policy treatment effect in the north and district controlled by regional candidates. 2. Positive public policy treatment effects in the south. 3. Positive public policy treatment effects on women in the north and in opposition controlled districts. And 4. Positive clientelist treatment effect for all types of candidates, though not significant in the profits analysis for the regional candidates and northern candidates. This can be summed up as in the north, they tend more for regional parties, while in the south to national opposition parties, which can be explained because the north part of Benin is poorer than the south. Also, it is important to stress out the gender gap, where women of the north seem to accept the public policy positively because they are traders, so they have to travel a lot through regions and creates them being more educated in terms that they know more languages will lead them to understand other political leaders, and also they are more informed about social and economic conditions in a national way. This information collected will be very important to get conclusions. But before, it is important to answer to the second question, where it is asked why Benin continues having a low development on its economy and how can this be changed. Although it may seem that it doesn't have any relation with clientelism, it does. Clientelism shows a preference for developing in a regional level rather than a national. This is determined by ethnicity and geography, so it is based in historical background. So what relation does it have with economic development? Because this development is led from institutions that come from the past. Institutions were developed during the colonial era. So nowadays political institutions don't have the real function, leading to a bad function. So then bad policies and consequently low economic development. This government failure can be understood because they are not general interest policies, just sectorial, where the elites control the economy. In fact, a good government can fix the market, but they don't because their lack of honesty, and although they would like to fix it, it's really difficult to solve it out, which will always lead to corruption and neglect. Besides, this is more probable in poor countries because the lack of information and funds, and the historical background of government failures, which leads to the situation where they don't trust more in a national development but in a regional, and this is clientelism. To avoid this, the only way is by a help from institutions of developed countries. Nevertheless, they are stuck because the lack of relation between nations due to the fact that most poor countries don't vote for a national interest political, but for a regional political system because of the importance of ethnic voting due to historical reasons. Although we just have the setup and the second question answers in some way to the first one, I consider necessarily to split up both questions due to the second question tackle more information, and it is to know the reason of the low economic development in Benin, which is explained in some part thanks to the success of clientelism. Anyways, at the time of establishing conclusions, we will do it as a whole, because as we had observed, both questions answer themselves together. Answering to why does clientelism have that much impact and importance in Benin has a main answer, and it is because they vote for ethnics because they think that voting to an ethnic is a tradition, and this has to be like that until the society gets modernized. And they don't have knowledge of what they vote, so they vote for tradition. Also, it has something to be the impact of political failure, which gets the country to don't believe in a national union, but in a regional way. Then why have we seen that in some parts of Benin the votes go to public goods are well accepted? These votes come overall of women and young voters, and also citizens of the South. Ethnic affiliation has a lot of relation with voting, and women and young voters of the North have been the ones able to develop some education and know a little bit more about economic and political situation. So that is why they adopt for a national political party. The solution for getting a development on economy is finishing with different demographic groups that split the country and don't create a national union. Is by creating a credible message that makes society vote in favor of general interest policies. This idea will lead to a union with other nations and have the help of developed countries. Anyways, if politics start understanding the motivations on society and lead to a fiction of institutions, civil society will be empowered and governments will maintain the rule of law, and then there will be a development of the economy. Despite all the presentation has run across the idea that in poor countries, and having an example, Benin, politics are led by ethnics. The results discussed here indicate quite clearly that voting behavior is from being entirely determined by ethnic affiliation, and more important, that clientelist appeals are not universally accepted even among poor voters and at low levels of economic development.